Before I go on with the video, I'd like to have a disclaimer. If anyone has trouble hearing about medical procedures or blood, please do not continue watching this video. Thank you. Good morning, YouTube. My name is Captain Kulo2, and today's episode is a special one as it marks 10 years since I was given a second chance at life. I want to say a huge thank you to those who have subscribed so far, making my goal of 10 subscribers possible. So if you want to celebrate with me today, please consider subscribing. Anyways, on to the video. So a decade ago, on June 18th, 2011, that is the day that my life changed forever. That morning, everyone in my family was home except for my oldest brother, who was attending his driver's education classes. I was watching a movie at the time. I don't want to mention the name of this movie, as it brings back bad memories. Ratatouille. Sorry, I had a cough there. So once the movie was over and the credits were rolling, that's when it happened. There was a sudden explosion of pain within my head like none other. I started to scream and began burrowing my head in the couch, all the while opened my skull with my bare hands. My dad rushed inside to see what was going on and ask what is wrong, and all I kept saying was, "It's the worst pain I've ever had in my life." My mom went to get me some Tylenol to relieve the pain in my head, and my dad kept urging me to toughen up a bit. It's just a headache. But the Tylenol wasn't working, and the pain was growing exponentially. It was at this point that both my mom and dad felt a physical rush of wind inside the house, even though there was no air conditioning at the time. And they knew it was something much more serious than a normal headache. They then grabbed me and drove as fast as possible, while still following the laws, to the nearest medical clinic. We all get inside the clinic, and I am still screaming in pain, but my skin was growing paler by the second, and I was losing my balance and focus. The receptionist immediately saw that something urgent was going on and required all the doctors to examine me immediately. They all rushed me to the back and started running basic tests on me. One of the doctors was asking me, "Captain Kulo2, can you tell me your name?" But I was mentally not there and was not responding in any form or fashion. My skin then went paler than ever before. I vomited, and then my eyes rolled up to the back of my head before I passed out totally. The staff then called for an ambulance immediately, and within seconds, I'm not even joking, the paramedics came through the doors with a stretcher, and they laid me on it and put me in the back of the ambulance. Apparently, the ambulance was already there, literally just 2 small buildings away, waiting for it to be called. My mom and my dad decided to split up, where my mom hopped in the ambulance and they sped off with their sirens blazing. My dad went off in the opposite direction to go get my brothers. He first drove home to get my middle brother and wrote an email to all our friends from church to pray for me. He then drove off to the driver's education school to pick up my oldest brother. Dad tried many times to call him, but he was not answering. By the time he reached the school, the class had already finished, and my oldest brother was waiting outside to be picked up. My dad urged him to get into the car quickly, saying that I had a stroke or something, and he immediately sped off to go downtown. My dad called my mom and asked where I was taken. I was taken to the Texas Children's Hospital in the Med Center of Houston. Meanwhile, Dad was driving. Mom was in the waiting room while the doctors were putting me in an MRI to get a complete scan of my brain. Around half an hour later, my dad and my brothers made it to the hospital, and my dad met up with my mom, where they were approached by the head doctor. He said that I was having a brain bleed caused by a ruptured arteriovenous malformation, or an AVM, in my brain. He then informed them that if they had waited any longer, I would have passed away. The doctor then informed them that they had drilled a hole in my skull to drain out the blood and relieve the pressure. I was already put into a medically induced coma at this point, so there was nothing that could be done at the moment except to just wait. After some time, many priests came by to visit me and prayed for me, and the priests at my church even asked the 2,000 members to pray for me that afternoon. After that day, days began to pass without any sense of time, and then weeks passed on. During that time, I was still in pain, and I was stuck in a constant nightmare where I was being drowned and a tank full of piranhas eating me alive, with no way out. During the weeks that passed by, word about my condition had spread across the country, and it didn't matter what religion you belonged to, we needed all the prayers that we could get, and they did. During one of these days, my dad had brought along my brothers so that they could visit me, even though I was still in a coma. My dad brought my oldest brother in the room first. They began to talk about something while in the room, but I must have heard them as my body was trying to wake up from the coma so that I could see them. I sat straight up and all the alarms and whistles were blazing. My dad and my brother immediately fled the room as doctors and nurses began flooding in to inject me with medical drugs to keep me stable. After that, my body just laid there. A giant tube hanging out of my skull, draining the blood. Tubes going in my mouth and throat and nose to pump oxygen inside me. Many IVs going in my arms, and a painful catheter. Many more days passed. My oldest brother continued to attend his driver's education class. My middle brother went with his friend to Florida for a vacation. Most of my closest relatives drove down so that they could help out with our family. And my mom kept an eye on me at all times, reminding me to breathe. It was found out that I'm a very, very deep sleeper, and that my heart would beat so slow that the monitors would go off every 15 seconds or less. After all this time, all of the blood in my brain was drained, and it was time to wake me up. The head doctor took my parents aside, telling them that they do not know how I will be once I woke up. I could be entirely blind, as the rupture from the AVM happened near the part of my brain that dealt with eyesight. They didn't know. No one did. As the nurses lessened the dosage, I began to awaken. When I came to, I looked around my room, and I saw strangers all around me. I could not recognize my family at all. I asked my mom where my mom was. It was heartbreaking. Also, because of all the medical drugs I was on, I saw hallucinations of scary monsters and creatures everywhere. I was very, very scared. And then I took notice of all the wires that were hooked up to me, and I immediately started ripping off all the heart monitors, pulled my IVs out. The alarms went blazing again. I then began ripping out my catheter and the tube inside my head. The nurses got there just in time before I really hurt myself. They bound my arms with zip ties and put me back to sleep. Over the next few days, I began to remember things, but I also developed a somewhat negative attitude. I was mad and I just wanted to go back home, but we couldn't. The doctors still needed to remove the AVM itself. The surgery was scheduled for July 8th, 2011. And when that day came, my entire family came to the hospital. They all said that they loved me, and I was wheeled off to the surgery room for my operation and sedated me to sleep. Over the next 5 hours, my entire family sat in the waiting room, hoping and praying that I would make it out of this alive. Meanwhile, in the surgery room, the doctors cut open my skull and dug into my brain to find the AVM. After some time, the AVM was found, and they cut it out of my brain and quickly filled the gap with medical glue and hoped that the blood would reroute back towards my eyes so that I wouldn't go blind. After that, they patched and stitched my brain and skull back together. In the waiting room, my family was still there, just silently waiting. And when the head doctor walks out the doors and approaches my family, he said, "The surgery was successful, and he will make it." My family comes to my room where I was resting and saw me peacefully sleeping. Over the course of the next week, I had many neighbors and friends show up to see me. There was a deacon from my church who brought me IHOP pancakes because I really wanted IHOP pancakes. There was a police officer also from my church who showed up and played a board game with me to cheer me up. My third grade teacher visited and gave me a stuffed teddy bear. During that time, I also had to relearn how to think, speak, and even how to walk again. After about a week or so, the doctors gave us the permission to return me back to my home. On the car ride home, memories of the places we passed by came back to my mind, filling my body with great joy. We drove into the neighborhood and finally back to my home. Looking around, I had noticed that everywhere on my street had a green ribbon wrapped on a part of their houses for me. My mom and dad helped walk me to our front door, where we were greeted by all our neighbors welcoming me back home. Over the years that followed, I had to overcome many more challenges that came as a side effect from the surgery. But if you or someone you know is facing a serious illness, never let yourself or anyone lose your hope and faith. Keep on moving, keep on persisting, and never give up. When the wind and waves rock your boat, always trust in God for a better tomorrow. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing to help me get to my next milestone of 25 subscribers. Thank you for listening, and anyways, good night, YouTube.